faster than a speeding bullet,
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
more powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here from Into 3 Fitness, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. This week we have Patrick McKeown, and phenomenal discussion we had with him. You know, something that's really important and up and coming and has been gaining more and more popularity is breathing. Sounds silly, just because we all have to breathe, right? But you probably are breathing incorrectly, and if you're an athlete, there's a lot of steps that you could take to improve your breathing, and a lot of steps you could take to improve your breathing when you sleep, to improve your life overall. We hop into all of that. And what I love most about this episode is that Patrick gives us the most practical, usable information that we can execute today. So take some notes and take some action. All right, guys, listen to this interview and breathe. All right, Patrick, I am super pumped to have you on the Better Humanology podcast. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Jared.
Now, before we get started with any sort of introduction or you know, what you do and all that great stuff, let's start with a fitness challenge for everybody listening to the show today.
Sure. A very simple one to test your upper tolerance of breathlessness is to take a normal breath in through your nose, a normal breath out through your nose, and start walking while holding your breath. And count how many paces you can hold your breath for. A pretty good athlete can hold their breath for about 60 paces, whereas a very good athlete with a good tolerance of breathlessness can hold their breath for about 80 paces. Now remember, this is a breath out and a hold, so that will cause quite a disturbance to the blood acid base, and it is challenging, and it is a good measurement of your upper tolerance of breathlessness.
So breath all the way in, breath all the way out, then.
So it's only a normal breath in, normal breath out through your nose, pinch your nose and start walking.
Okay.
And count how many paces that you can hold your breath for. And when you need to resume breathing, just let go, but breathe in through your nose.
I love it. I'm going to try it right after we're finished recording here. I think that'll be really cool.
Excellent. And you might even find it opens up your nose as well.
Awesome. All right. How about a mental toughness challenge for everybody listening?
I suppose there's one aspect of it here is in terms of focus and concentration. For how long can you stop thinking before thoughts enter your mind? And I don't talk about a forced cessation of thinking where you're forcing your mind to be still, but differently in terms of, you know, switching off the mind and having complete immersion in the present moment and seeing how many seconds does it take before your mind is flooded with thoughts. This is a good measurement of the degree of mental acuity, focus, concentration. Individuals with good concentration will be able to stop thinking for a relatively long period of time. And if the mind is very distracted or if you're stressed, you know, it might be just a second or so before thoughts flood in. So it's a mental challenge.
Yeah, I like that you could kind of benchmark it too. Time how long it takes, and then you know, maybe come back from your baseline and see how much better you can get over time.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. All
right. How about a book recommendation?
One book that changed my life 20 years ago was Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. I'm sure many of your people that you've interviewed have recommended it. And you know what? If I was to recommend one book, I still recommend the same book, and that's The Power of Now. And that's, you know, I've hundreds of books, possibly thousands, and that book will always be the top of my bookshelf.
Yeah, and what was so impactful about that book for you?
Well, you know, in terms of, I had a very active mind when I was in my early teens into my 20s, and society puts a lot of pressure on us, you know, to achieve, to run for the next item, you know. You're in high school and you have to do well in your exams, you have to get into university, and then you're rushing towards the future in university. And in many ways, I was so stressed in university because the whole objective was to do well in exams that I reduced my time in university, that I was never in the present. I was always rushing towards the future. And because I was stressed, my concentration was deplorable. My concentration was deplorable. My sleep was terrible. So I came across the breath when I was in my mid-20s, and at about the same time, I read The Power of Now. I was in Canada, and that was in about 1999, I think it was, or maybe even 2000. And I picked up the book, and there's something in it. It's not just the words that you're reading, and I know this kind of sounds a bit airy-fairy, but it's almost that there's a presence in the words or between the words that when you're reading it, it'll bring you into presence, and the mind will go quiet. Now, it's not for everybody. However, I would say to anybody is, start reading it, pick it up. There's a lot of power in those sentences.
Awesome. I actually don't think that we've had that recommended. So definitely adding that one to the list. I appreciate that.
Excellent.
All right. So if you could give us a quick, background on your work, what you do, and, go back as far as you need to kind of tell the story. Would love to learn more about it.
Sure. I'm not an athlete. I kind of came into the oxygen advantage. It was a little bit by accident. And in my early, as I was just mentioning earlier on, when I was going through high school, for me to get exams, I had to spend a lot of hours studying. And the reason being was because my attention was never focused on where it was. I was constantly living in my head, ruminating on thoughts, jumping from one thought to the other, anxious about the future. At the same time, I had breathing issues. I had asthma. I was taking a lot of medication. I had a constantly blocked nose. I was constantly mouth breathing. So my breathing was always off. And my sleep was off as a result of it. So by accident, I read an article in an Irish newspaper called the Irish Independent, or it could have been the Irish Times even, but it was about the work of a Russian doctor. And his research was deciding what was the ideal composition of oxygen for astronauts going up into space. So in terms of the capsules, what would be ideal for an astronaut to survive on. He also had high blood pressure. He started changing his breathing, slowing down his breathing and breathing less, and he was able to influence his blood circulation and bring his body into relaxation. So he was able to change and to bring down his high blood pressure. I had asthma. I started basic exercises from his method. His name was Dr. Konstantin Buteyko. I learned how to open up my nose. I learned to switch to nose breathing, and I learned how to slow down my breathing. So I was able to open up my airways. I was able to dramatically improve my sleep, because the one thing about sleep is anybody who wakes up with a dry mouth in the morning, you are not having a good night's sleep. And that's no question about it. If the nose is stuffy, you're twice as likely to have sleep problems. I was always breathless, because it's your everyday breathing that determines your breathlessness or degree of breathlessness during sports, during physical training. And oftentimes you'll have an individual athlete and, they're more breathless than what they should be during an event. And the strength and conditioning coach will usually put it down to poor conditioning. Not always so. Breathing is very, very important because it often will set the limits in terms of either endurance or high intensity. It's your breath that sets the limits. And yet nobody looks at how is that individual breathing. And that, you know what, I don't mean just by talking about, say, take a few deep breaths or anything like that. No, I mean by looking at the breath from two aspects. One is addressing breathing pattern issues, and the other is by using the breath to greatly disturb the blood gases. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So in simple terms, if you breathe functionally, you're going to be less breathless during physical exercise. You're less prone to injury because your diaphragm stabilization of the spine. You have better movement and coordination, and you have better control. You have better concentration because your breathing is quieter, and you'll also have better sleep. The second aspect of it, in terms of breathing exercise, is that we do breath holding on the exhalation, and we do that to lower blood oxygen saturation. In other words, to literally subject the body to reduced oxygen. And also we greatly increase carbon dioxide, which is not just a waste gas. So we change the blood acid base balance in the blood, and that's designed then that we can improve buffering capacity. So we can delay lactic acid, the onset of fatigue, for example. So it would be great for people involved with anaerobic exercises, but we can also improve aerobic. So that was kind of the introduction in terms of I found this information. It completely changed my life. that I was an individual with asthma, constantly breathless, constantly wheezing, sleep issues, waking up tired all the time. And in my early 20s, I came across it, put it into practice, and it did more for me than 20 years going to medical doctors. And that's not a knock on anybody who's in the medical profession. But generally, a client or a patient, they're never taught about breathing through the nose, and they're never taught about functional breathing patterns. And yet, you can change your blood circulation, and you can open up your airways, and you can influence the amount of oxygen delivered to you through your breath. And what's more, it's the opposite to the commonly taught instruction about breathing. People have ideas about breathing, but they don't base their ideas, on medical physiology. So in terms of breathing, less is more. So that was it. I was in the asthma field and sleep field up until about 2010. I'm still in it to some degree. And in 2011, I started researching in sports. And I wanted to know, well, we knew anyway, we were able to get more oxygen delivery to the cells based on the physiology of what we were doing. So I was thinking to myself, well, can we show that we can reduce lactic acid? So I started along that route. And then I looked at the connection with the mind and sports, improving aerobic fitness, simulation of altitude training, improving respiratory muscle strength, and also for individuals who want to, say, stimulate anaerobic glycolysis. But it can be traumatic to do it continuously, and it increases the risk of injury. If you're continuously pushing yourself at a high intensity during training, it increases your risk of injury. But yet, at the same time, these individuals have to stimulate anaerobic glycolysis. So we do it instead. We have the individual walk or do a light jog, or even a little bit faster, but do it with a breath hold. So we can really push the body into an oxygen deprivation, and flood the blood with hydrogen ion, flood the muscle with hydrogen ion, and that in turn then is going to improve anaerobic capacity.
I think all of your work is very, very fascinating, and especially with its application, what you're just saying, aerobic endurance and just athletes in general. So you're saying you'll have someone hold their breath. What would the protocol be if someone wanted to go try that out today? If on a light jog, you said, or something in that nature.
Yeah, and I'd even say, don't do it with a jog yet. If people are exercising from home or exercising in their garden or whatever, first of all, if you're pregnant, if any of the females are pregnant, not to do it because it's quite stressful. And also, if you've got any serious medical conditions, high blood pressure, example, don't do it. But one exercise is very simple. It is encouraged to get a pulse oximeter. You could buy this on Amazon. You could pick up one of the cheaper ones for about $20 to $30. And the pulse oximeter is a little handheld device. It's a finger probe, and it measures your blood oxygen saturation. So it measures how fully loaded are your red blood cells with oxygen. Now, if you're doing it correctly, if you're doing the exercise correctly, you'll be able to drop your blood oxygen saturation. And you can drop it to a height, it's to simulate a height of about 4,000 to 5,000 meters. So you're literally a simulation of high altitude training, or it could be regarded as intermittent hypoxia training. So one of the exercises that you could do is start off gentle, take a small breath into your nose, small breath out to your nose, pinch your nose, hold your breath, and walk 15 paces holding your breath. And then let go, breathe in through your nose, and wait about 30 seconds and do it again. And do that 6 times. So that's nice and easy. You're only holding your breath for 15 paces. You're not really going to have a blood oxygen desaturation there. But that's to prepare you for the stronger exercise. So you have to do a little bit of a warm-up first. The first few go easy. And then when you're after doing a few easy ones, then again, take a normal breath in, normal breath out through your nose, pinch your nose and start walking. And then increase the pace to a light jog, and then increase the pace to a faster jog while you're continuously holding your breath. Push it to the point that you feel a pretty strong air hunger. You'll feel your breathing muscles contracting. You'll feel a strong feeling of breathlessness. Your legs, you might feel that your legs have a sensation of kind of jelliness, etc. And then to let go and to breathe in through your nose, but minimize your breathing for 6 breaths. So you minimize your breathing for 6 breaths, and then you have normal breathing for 12 to 18 breaths, and repeat it. Now, that exercise alone, you will find that if you were to do that 5 times a day, maybe 5 times twice a day, you'll simulate altitude training within 3 to 4 days. Sometimes people will do it straight off. Now, that exercise, even, in terms of improving respiratory muscle strength, because 50% of athletes are prone to diaphragmatic fatigue. And the energy cost associated with breathing is another thing, Jared, we don't look at. As we're sitting here, we're talking. About 2 to 3% of our oxygen consumption is going to support the breathing muscles. And if you're doing moderate physical exercise, it'll be probably in around 3 to maybe 6% during moderate physical exercise. If you're doing pretty intense physical exercise, about 10% of your oxygen consumption is going to support the breathing muscles. And if you're doing highly intense, maximal physical exercise, 15% of your oxygen consumption is going to support your breathing muscles. Now, I'm all about let's get your breathing more efficient. Your breathing is more efficient. For a given level of exercise, you don't have to work it as hard. And as a result, there's a less energy cost associated with breathing. So that's one thing we can train. The second thing is that the diaphragm, it's your main breathing muscle, and then the lower ribs, you've got the intercostals. So the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, if you overwork them, they're prone to fatigue. They get tired, and if they get tired, literally blood is stolen from the legs to feed the diaphragm. So the athlete has to slow down or cease. So, we want to train the diaphragm. We want to add an extra load onto the diaphragm to strengthen it. And it's like anything else that you're doing. You want to strengthen a muscle, you have to add an extra load onto it. So we use breath holding. And as you hold your breath and as the air hunger gets stronger, the respiratory center, which is located in your brain, is continuously sending messages to your diaphragm, to your intercostal muscles to breathe. And you'll feel the contraction of your breathing muscles. And as you continue holding the breath, it's almost as if you're giving the diaphragm a workout. So during training, we tire out the diaphragm and we tire out the intercostals. And that builds up their strength, inspiratory muscle strength, expiratory muscle strength. So during competition, you've got stronger breathing. A third aspect of that exercise there is that you're subjecting your body to a very strong degree of breathlessness. And by the way, it shouldn't be stressful. If you're trying it, you should always be able to recover within 2 to 3 breaths. We don't want to be doing stupid things either. We want to be challenging the body, but there's no point in overdoing it because the body will adapt when we work with it. And if you overdo it, it's going to have an opposite effect. So we're challenging the body, and it's almost that there's a central governor in the brain. And if you were to go with Hill's model, or even Dr. Timothy Noakes, he's a South African physiologist, that he's saying that it doesn't make sense for the legs to terminate physical exercise. If you've got an athlete and they're really pushing themselves, somebody say MMA or high intensity or even marathon runners, and the next thing is their legs are just going from under them. They're feeling jelly. Well, it's not the legs. The body isn't that concerned with the legs because the legs aren't the most important function of the human body. The body is, during physical exercise, the role of the body or the protective mechanism is to make sure that the heart doesn't overdo it. So there's one theory is based on the central governor theory, and this is monitoring the state of oxygen of, say, the diaphragm, maybe other receptors throughout the body, the amount of oxygen getting to the heart, etc. And if, for instance, the amount of oxygen reaching the diaphragm or reaching the heart, etc., is going too low, the central governor will send a message to the legs to slow down, because the brain is going to send a message to the legs to slow down in order to protect the heart from overdoing it. Now, when we're doing a strong breath hold, we're literally resetting that central governor because we're pushing the body into a state of oxygen deprivation. Now, I mean, you can think of about a 100-meter sprinter or a 200-meter sprinter, and you can say, okay, there's going to be a change in blood gases there. We go well beyond that. And we do that. You can do it in your sitting room. So to give you an example, if your normal blood oxygen saturation is 95 to 99%, that the red blood cells, which carry the vast majority of your oxygen in the blood, they're almost fully loaded with oxygen, 95 to 99% saturated with oxygen. When you do a sprint, if you do a sprint with your mouth open, you'll probably drop your SpO2, your blood oxygen saturation, down to about 93%. If you do the sprint with the mouth closed and you're breathing through your nose, you'll probably drop it a bit further, 91%. At the same time, your carbon dioxide levels won't change that much in the blood. So your oxygen levels will drop to very mild hypoxia. The 91% would be mild hypoxia. In other words, there's a deprivation of oxygen reaching the tissue. So what we do is during breath holding, we drop the blood oxygen saturation, say from 98% down to 87% or 86% or even down as low as 80%. And that's severe hypoxia. So that's a severe deprivation of oxygen at the tissue level. Now, at the same time, we increase carbon dioxide in the blood from a normal would be 40 millimeter of mercury pressure up to about 50 or even beyond that. So we're greatly disturbing the blood acid base balance, far more than what you could do if you were doing sprinting. You wouldn't achieve that. Now, how can I say that? Because I've measured, we've measured it with sprinters, and I've measured this with thousands of individuals using pulse oximetry. I've designed special exercises where we can achieve that effect. So we see it and it's reproducible. So that would be one aspect of it. Now, another aspect of doing a strong breath hold is very effective if you've got hay fever, if your nose is stuffy, or if you've got asthma, if your airways are blocked. Because as you hold your breath on the exhale, there's also a gas called nitric oxide that pools inside in the nasal cavity. And nitric oxide is a sterilization of the air. It's antibacterial, and it's also a bronchodilator. In other words, it opens up the airways. So the one of the functions of nitric oxide in the nose would be to keep the nose or the nasal cavity free of infection. But when you breathe through your nose, you carry nitric oxide into the lower airways, into your lungs, and nitric oxide opens up the airways. Now, we think of our skin, in terms of the exposure of the skin to the atmosphere. The area of the skin that's in contact with the atmosphere, if you were totally naked, is 2 meters. So 2 meters of your body is exposed to the atmosphere in terms of skin. Now, your lungs are also exposed to the atmosphere, especially if you do physical exercise, because every breath you take into your lungs, you're taking atmospheric air from the atmosphere and into your body, and it's arriving into the small air sacs in the lungs. If you were to look at the area of contact between the lungs and the atmosphere, it's 50 to 100 square meters. Now, your skin is 2, and your lungs are up to 50 times more area in contact. We look after our skin, but we don't look after our lungs. And the only way to look after our lungs is we have to look at our everyday breathing. We have to breathe through the nose, both during the day and also during sleep. And we have to improve our breathing in terms of functioning for sports. So that's kind of just to give you a nutshell in terms of it. Now, there's probably a couple of other things. An interesting thing about hormones, for example, when you do a breath hold and you lower your blood oxygen saturation, your kidneys will produce a hormone called erythropoietin, and your liver will do it to a lesser extent. And erythropoietin, people probably know it in the short form as EPO or EPO. I think Lance Armstrong would have put that on the map there a couple of years ago. So the reason that the guys from the Tour de France were taking hormones such as EPO, they were taking it in an artificial way. And it's a hormone, and as it comes into the body, it sends a message to the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. Your red blood cells carry your oxygen. So if you can increase the amount of red blood cells in the blood, in other words, if you can increase your hemoglobin, if you can increase your hematocrit, it has a direct impact on your VO2 max. Because anything you do to increase your red blood cell, your oxygen carrying capacity, it allows more oxygen to be delivered to the blood. So that's why people would have taken EPO. Now, another organ that has an effect when you do a strong breath hold is your spleen. And your spleen is your blood bank. So if your body demands more blood, the spleen will release blood into circulation. Or if the supply is too much, if the supply of blood is too much in the body, your spleen will hold on to blood. And your spleen contains about 8% of your entire blood count. So there's a fair amount of blood that's stored inside in the spleen. But what's more about the spleen is that the concentration, the quality of the blood cells is very rich. Normally, in a male, if you were to look at their entire blood in terms of white blood cells, plasma, and red blood cells, the percent of their oxygen carrying capacity, which is their hematocrit, is about between 40 to 50%. So if you had a top athlete with, say, 49 or 50% hematocrit, well, your spleen is densely packed red blood cells. The quality of the red blood cells in the spleen, it's 80% hematocrit. All it takes is 5 breath holds to cause the spleen to contract. So, in a nutshell, you do 5 repetitions of the exercise that I just spoke about. It can improve your aerobic capacity. Now, there are some non-responders, so I can't say for 100% that yes, every athlete that does it, is it going to improve their aerobic capacity? We have many studies that show it does, and there are some studies which show it doesn't. And I've also seen it in practice. I've seen non-responders. Why? That I don't know. That's another question for another day. But improving aerobic capacity isn't the only thing that we want to do in terms of athletic performance. I also want to open up the airways. I want to open up the upper airways, the lower airways. I want to improve respiratory muscle strength. I want to delay lactic acid and fatigue. And I also want to reset or train the central governor in the brain, that the athlete can push themselves harder and faster. I want to reduce breathlessness. I want to expose the athlete to improve their upper state of tolerance of breathlessness. Like even a very simple thing, a guy doing MMA fighting, he's pushing himself. Well, we can push to a good degree to get the bodies to make adaptations so you can cope with that. And anybody who's going into high intensity exercise, you have to look at your breathing. Don't let your breathing let you down, because if your breathing lets you down, that's it, game over.
One thing you mentioned earlier on where you said there are a lot of misconceptions with breathing. And, I think that people are starting to realize that breathing, it sounds silly when you say like breathing is important, right? But it's not just because we're all breathing each and every single day or else we wouldn't be around. So that's, I kind of would love to focus on those misconceptions, because I feel like you probably run into it from time to time where people just don't fully understand, or they don't understand the misconceptions about breathing. If you could just maybe elaborate on some of those a little bit.
Sure. So you can measure your breathing straight off. We've got what's called a BOLT test. Well, I call it BOLT. It's a breath hold time. So it's body oxygen level test. And you'd want to be sitting down for about 5 or 10 minutes before you do it. All you need is a stopwatch. You take a normal breath in through your nose and you allow a normal breath out. And then you pinch your nose and you time it in seconds until you feel the first involuntary stimulus to breathe, or the first distinct reaction of your body to take a breath. What your BOLT score measures is your degree of functionality of your breathing. How efficient is your breathing? And it also measures the onset and endurance of breathlessness during physical exercise. So again, that measurement, if any of your listeners, all you need is a watch or a phone or something with a second hand, take a normal breath in through your nose, allow a normal breath out through your nose, pinch your nose with your fingers, and time it in seconds until you feel the first distinct reaction of your body to breathe. In other words, when you feel, I need to take a breath, that's it. Now, your breath at the end should be fairly normal. So if you have to take bigger breaths at the end of it, you've gone too far. So what's the cutoff point there? Well, an interesting paper published in the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy in October of last year. They used 4 questions from the functional movement screen, and they also assessed breath hold time. And they found that if your breath hold time is less than 25 seconds, and also if you score positively in terms of, do you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning? Do you find yourself yawning during the day? Or do you notice yourself having, say, cold hands, cold feet? Or do you feel tense during the day? So if your breath hold time, the main one from my point of view would be, if your breath hold time is less than 25 seconds, the paper showed that there's an 89% chance that you have dysfunctional breathing or breathing pattern disorder. So now we have to consider, well, what is the implications if you have a breathing pattern disorder? One is you're going to have excessive breathlessness. Number 2 is that you're expending more energy on your breathing than what you should be devoting to the rest of your body. Number 3, if your breathing is hard, your sleep is often affected. And also if your breathing is relatively fast at rest, your mind is affected. So stress increases and makes your breathing faster, but fast breathing will feed into stress. So it's not just that, there's a feedback loop there. It also shows that if you have a breathing pattern disorder, that it increases your risk. You have an increased risk of injury. So, in terms of addressing breathing, if you want to get more oxygen delivered to your cells, you want to have a high Bolt score, because this is how it happens. You take a breath in, oxygen will pass into the lungs, and there's a very thin membrane. It passes lungs into the blood, and in the blood, your oxygen is carried by a molecule called hemoglobin. So hemoglobin carries most of the oxygen in the blood. So there is a small amount of oxygen dissolved directly in the blood. It's not all that much. It wouldn't be enough to sustain life. So oxygen is carried in the blood two ways. 3 milliliters of oxygen per 1 liter of blood is dissolved directly in the blood. That's one way it's carried. But the main way that oxygen is carried is by hemoglobin. So hemoglobin allows 70 times more oxygen to be carried in the blood than what otherwise would be. Now you can imagine this hemoglobin traveling around. So basically your oxygenated blood goes from the lungs to the heart, and your heart then is pumping this oxygenated blood around the body so that the oxygen can be delivered to your cells. Now, in order for oxygen to be released from the red blood cells to the cells, you need carbon dioxide. But if you breathe hard, you get rid of too much carbon dioxide from the lungs, and as a result, it automatically lowers it in the blood. So your arterial CO2 is influenced by your alveolar CO2, or in simple terms, the carbon dioxide pressure in the blood is influenced by how you breathe. And if you breathe hard, and all it takes is 30 seconds of hard breathing, 30 seconds of big breaths in and out, you will halve the level or the concentration of CO2 in the blood. Now, CO2 is not just a waste gas. Number one, the release of oxygen from the red blood cells to the cells is dependent on carbon dioxide. If you breathe hard, you get rid of too much CO2, and as a result, the affinity or the bond between the red blood cells and oxygen increases. Less oxygen is delivered to the cells when you breathe hard. That's one function of CO2. The second function is that we have smooth muscle embedded in our blood vessels and in our airways. And if we breathe hard and we lose carbon dioxide, smooth muscle constricts. So our blood vessels constrict, our airways constrict. Number three, carbon dioxide is the primary regulator of blood pH. So it's your blood pH, and it's so important that the body maintains homeostasis, that you maintain normal blood pH 7.365. That's done through your breath. So we often think about carbon dioxide, often you hear is take a big breath or take a deep breath, and the individual is taking a big breath of fresh air. Number one, it's not going to increase your blood oxygen saturation. Those big breaths don't increase your blood oxygen saturation, but those big breaths get rid of CO2. And as a result, the oxygen that's in your blood is not getting delivered. Now, when you take a few big breaths, it will actually increase the amount of oxygen that's carried in the blood, in the plasma. And the real question here is, so you might be asking, well, what about the Wim Hof method? The Wim Hof method involves 30 big breaths followed by retention of the breath, a breath hold. We have a lot in common with the Wim Hof method. The main thing is that we don't do is I never encourage hyperventilation. I don't necessarily, a lot of the people that I was working with originally were coming in with health complaints, so I didn't want to expose them to the extremes. But I also understood with the physiology of breathing that I didn't want to be getting rid of carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is a benefit in the body. It's very important. In order for the body to use oxygen, you need CO2, you need carbon dioxide. Now, if you do take, say, 30 big breaths, you're not going to increase the saturation of the blood with oxygen. It's already almost fully loaded when you breathe normally, but it will increase the amount of oxygen dissolved directly in the blood. So there is some small change there. Now, the 30 big breaths at the same time gets rid of CO2. So the oxygen that's carried by the hemoglobin is not going to get released. So, it's a very exciting time in terms of breathing, and breathing now is getting a lot of attention. And there's some stuff we don't know. So, I think we do need more research. Breath holding has been shown through the Wim Hof method to improve immune functioning. The individuals who were doing over breathing and also doing breath holding, that it was greatly increasing their epinephrine levels. So, for instance, when they were injected with flu toxins, they were better able to resist flu. Now, I've seen this since 2002 because I've worked with thousands of people. They used to come into me with chest infections, different complaints, and we were seeing this change. Now, I always thought it was due to an increase of nitric oxide. I thought it could be more efficient breathing in terms of we're getting more oxygen delivery to the cells, but also breath holding. Because it's causing a stress to the body makes adaptations. So in terms of health and fitness, I think it's a very useful thing to employ. So back to your question, what is a deep breath? If I was to look at the word deep, a definition of it could be far from the top. So a deep breath just means that you're using your diaphragm, and that's what we're about. And by the way, you can only have a deep breath if you breathe through your nose. Your nose and your diaphragm are directly linked. Your mouth and your chest are directly linked. So if you have an individual going around with his mouth all day open or sleeping with his mouth open at night, well, what he's doing is he's chest breathing or she's chest breathing, and he's activating or she's activating the fight or flight response. So yes, it's true. A deep breath is beneficial, but it should be light. Good breathers, you never hear their breathing during rest. It should be difficult to hear their breathing, but also it should be difficult to see their breathing. So we've one rule of thumb. When I look at somebody's breathing, it should be through the nose, it should be diaphragmatic, it should be regular, it should be light, it should have a gentle, relaxed exhalation. And after you breathe out, there should be a natural pause before you need to take a breath in again. And that's good breathing. And that individual will have a Bolt score of, say, plus 30 seconds. Now they're doing pretty good. So if an athlete comes into me, I measure two things. I want to know what is their Bolt score. If it's less than 25 seconds, we've got huge room for improvement. I also want to measure what's the maximum tolerance of their breathlessness. How far can this individual push themselves? So I measure the amount of paces that they can hold their breath for. So I described that exercise at the start. Those two exercises give me great feedback on breathing. And then we know if an athlete is making progress. Number one, his Bolt score is increasing. And number two, the amount of paces that he can hold his breath for are increasing. So I look at those two aspects of it. And if you put it into practice, yes, your breathing will improve. And if your breathing improves, it can affect not just your sports and fitness, but your concentration, your sleep. And that's another aspect, George, we should be looking at. If you have your mouth open during sleep and you're waking up with a dry mouth, you're not going to wake up fully functioning 100%. And you can imagine an individual wanting to go into work, poor night's sleep, poor quality sleep, because mouth breathing during sleep is the worst thing you can do in terms of a bad night's sleep. And an athlete in competition or somebody who has to maintain focus and, clarity, they have to get their mouth closed. So what we use paper tape. There's a great company in Colorado. It's a small little business. It's called Lip Seal Tape. It's have no financial interest whatsoever in it, but I think their tape is excellent. It was invented by a dentist there, and he invented it because his patients were coming in and they were bruxing, so they were grinding their teeth, and he was getting upset because he would do their crowns, and he'd tell me that a few months later they come back in, their crowns are broken, he has to do it again, and he said the solution was to get them to close their mouth at night. So if your mouth is closed at night, there's stabilization of the jaws, your airways are more open, you get a deeper sleep, and you get a better quality sleep and a less stressful sleep. So less snoring and less obstructive sleep apnea. Athletes can have that too. You need to get your breathing right. You don't want to be pushing your heart during your sleep, and then during the day you're pushing your heart again. Then your heart isn't getting a rest. And when I was writing the book, I was wondering, why are these athletes? Why are young, healthy, fit athletes? Why are they having heart problems? We have to look at sleep. What's going on during your sleep? Are you stopping breathing? Are you putting the heart under a lot of stress during your sleep? And as a result, then, it's catching up then during the day. So back to what's a deep breath? What's a light breath? What's good breathing? Well, the harder you breathe, the less oxygen gets delivered to your cells. So maybe for your listener to practice this, put one hand on their chest, one hand on their tummy, follow their breathing. Feel the slightly colder air as it comes into your nose, and feel the slightly warmer air as it leaves the nose. And as you feel your breathing, gently start slowing it down. And slow down your breathing so that you're slowing down the speed of the air as it enters and leaves your nostrils. So you're really kind of working to slow down your breathing. Minimal breathing. You're hiding your breathing. You're quietening the breath. And you're slowing breath to the point that you feel air hunger. Now, the air hunger isn't because your oxygen levels have dropped, because the stimulus to breathe is carbon dioxide. Now, what's happening here is as you slow down your breathing, carbon dioxide increases in the blood. And as carbon dioxide increases in the blood, there's more oxygen getting released from the red blood cells to the cells. So here's an exercise to improve your body oxygenation in 3 to 4 minutes. Can you improve your blood circulation? Can you improve the amount of oxygen delivery to your cells? And can you activate the relaxation response of the body? So practice it. You follow your breath and you're deliberately slowing down your breathing so that the amount of air you're taking into your body is less now than what it was before you started. You're slowing down your breathing by about 30%. Your breathing movements are reducing by about 30%. You feel air hunger. The air hunger is telling you that carbon dioxide is increased in the blood. And as carbon dioxide increases in the blood, your blood vessels are going to open up. You'll change your body temperature. You'll feel warmer. So if you do it correctly, you shouldn't feel stressed. But it's kind of normal at the start. People feel a bit stressed. They overdo it with the air hunger. If you overdo it with the air hunger, if you feel stressed, just take a rest for about a half a minute and start again. Check a number of things. Check the amount of saliva in your mouth. Has it increased or decreased? And check your body temperature. Has it increased or decreased? And by the way, cold hands, cold feet is a sign that somebody is breathing too hard.
Oh, that's very interesting. And you know what I love about all of your recommendations? They're so practical. You could everyone listening to this, because everyone has homework. We could all get started right away doing a lot of these things, and I think that's incredible. I really appreciate going over those in detail. That was great.
Sure, no problem.
Now I want to get to the quickfire questions of the show, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right. So, what is the hardest workout you've ever done?
I was 3 months developing a breathing exercise using pulse oximetry. And I call it advanced simulation of altitude training. Now, this is only light jogging, by the way, but there's a hard workout in terms of two things. Either you can do a hard workout by really pushing your body, or you can do a hard workout by breathing less. So the advanced simulation of altitude took me 3 months to do. And it's basically involving you breathe in, breathe out, you hold your breath for 10 paces, and then you take a sip of air. Now, I mean 1/10 of a breath in, out, hold again for 10 paces. A sip of air, in, out, hold again for 10 paces. A sip of air, in, out, hold again for 10 paces. And during that time, you're continuously jogging. Try it, and you'll see it's a hard workout. And that's designed to push the body to the extreme. So for anybody who's relatively fit, give it a go. You'll feel it at the end of it.
All right.
And by the way, you just have to do it for about 1 to 2 minutes. It's not something that you're going to sustain, for that long.
That's a good footnote there. All right. And in your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
The only way to build mental toughness is have control over your mind. And it's really about bringing this into your everyday life. Mental toughness is probably something that we develop with experience, that when life throws, if I was to use the word, a bit of shit at us, as we get a bit older, we're better able to cope with it. And that's what life experience does to us. However, having clarity of thought, when I was in my early 20s, I'd always be worrying, to be honest with you. It was always worry. And I never realized that I had no control over my mind. My mind was in total control over me. And whatever my mind was throwing up at me, I just believed it to be real. So for me, I really got into the breath 20 years ago, following the breath. And I don't mean kind of sitting in the corner like a yogi with beads and whatever. No, I want to carry my breath into everyday life. I'm walking down the street. I don't have my attention fully stuck in my head. Okay, it'll go up into my head every now and again, but I'll take my attention and periodically I'll follow my breathing and I connect with my breath. And it's tremendous in terms of the mind because it gives you a capacity to control the mind. And also it's, everybody's talking about mindfulness. Well, what does it mean? Like mindfulness is meaning that you're paying attention to the thoughts that are going through the mind. So it's when you see those same old thoughts over and over again, those worries, those regrets, and you have to ask the question, is my thinking helping me at this moment? Because it's not the event that causes stress, it's our reaction to the event. So the event we might not be able to change, but we can change our thinking. It takes a bit of practice. Don't wait until life goes wrong when to start meditating. And when I'm talking about meditating, I'm just meaning following your breathing. Nothing fancy. You're sitting in a bus, do it at the bus. You're sitting down watching some TV. Bring some attention onto your breathing. And make it a commitment to follow your breath for different times throughout the day. And that will increase your mental toughness.
I love that. All right. Now here's a fun one. If you could only have one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I would go say pulse oximeter. Very simple handheld device. Doesn't cost you that much. I'm not a tech guy, but I would use this because I've got a fascination with the breath. I want to simulate altitude training with my athletes. I want to push them. I want to disturb their blood acid base balance. And at the same time, I want to make sure that they don't go into the extremes, So I use pulse oximetry to get their blood oxygen saturation to below 91% and also to maintain it above 80%. So that's the one piece of equipment that at any course, I'll always have 15, 20 pulse oximetries with me.
And is there a particular brand that you recommend? I have one that I just picked up at a local drugstore I've had for several years. I mean, is there one, you depend on more for accuracy or anything like that?
Well, to be honest, like when I was writing the book, because all of mine are non-invasive. It's an American company, but I'm going to say this. I had 20 of them. And in the last 3 months, 4 of them broken me. And they're about $200 a pop. So that I'm saying to my athletes, listen, these are $200 a pop, but some of them I had only got for a few months and they broke. So I wasn't particularly happy with that. Now, the ones that you can buy in a drugstore, the only issue with them, now they work perfect. They're just a little bit slower. So you don't see the changes happen as quickly as you would with a more responsive. But listen, $30, go for it because it'll give you enough feedback to allow you to start. And if it's something that you really, many people, I suppose they will in time, they'll want to do it more and more. Go for a more responsive one then. But, start off with the cheap one and see how you go with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have noticed with mine, if I ever try to get a reading when my heart rate is extremely elevated or something, it takes longer. It's like wants to make sure that your state is currently where it thinks it is. But when you're at rest, it's a little bit more responsive. I have noticed that.
Yeah. Well, as well, it'll depend as well too on blood circulation. If we're doing really strong breath holds, there's what's called a diving response, and that the body will sense that there's a deprivation of oxygen. So it shuts down the peripheral blood supply because like the body is incredibly intelligent. If you do a strong breath hold after an exhalation, and the reason we do it after an exhalation is because we get the hypoxic response. If you breathe in and hold your breath, you're not really going to drop your blood oxygen saturation. So if you're doing a fairly strong breath hold, and again, it's not stressful, you're just pushing it a little bit, you'll often find that your hands go colder. And the reason being is because the body has sensed that there's a drop of oxygen. And now it wants to conserve oxygen for the heart and for the brain. So in actual fact, it opens up the blood vessels supplying the brain with oxygen. So the blood flow to the brain will increase to make sure that the brain still gets enough oxygen. And it'll take that blood from the hands. So if you're using pulse oximetry, your hands can go cold, and then it's more difficult for the device to read it. to read the blood oxygen saturation. But yeah, just another interesting thing that you might notice when you're doing a breath hold.
All right. Now, the question of the show, what is the best advice you have for becoming a better human? This is 100% open-ended.
When you leave this world, and we're all going to leave at some point, myself included, it should be left in a better place. So, I think in terms of relationships with people, in terms of our dealings, I think we should be fair. And I think life is about fun. The biggest thing that I've ever done that made the biggest impact on my life was to get a job that I loved. And that was huge. And I went into a field that people were saying, you're crazy. I went into breathing 15, 16 years ago. And now it's shown. It's the next best thing in sports, I believe. I think it's happening. We've seen a huge trajectory in the last 3 years. So yeah, a couple of things. Get something you love to do. You'll be passionate about it. And also leave this world in a better place, whether, your relationships with family, with friends, and with the people that you involve with.
Great advice. And I think, you're 100% correct on the breathing. It's just more and more interest coming out. And I really think it was almost, not in your case, because you've been in the field for a long time, but I'd say in my case, like a missing piece in just the health component overall. And especially with athletic training is like, we got the strength and conditioning programming here. We're working on mindset, a lot of things, but never enough focus on the breath and learning how important it is, especially having talked with you now for the last hour. I've learned an incredible amount of information. It's been great having you on the podcast. Now, I'm sure people are going to be interested everyone listening, be interested to learn more. Where could they go to do that? And what resources do you have for them to check out?
Sure. I put a lot of videos up on YouTube. Oxygen Advantage is the channel. So if you search it on YouTube, in terms of, because I think it's nice to put the science out there and learn what you can do to help yourself. So I put out maybe 20, 30 videos going through the science, going through some exercises. We have our own website, oxygenadvantage.com. I've got quite a few books. I've got one is called The Oxygen Advantage, and really I'd say to you is, look at your breath. There's so much you can do with it. And, even just to improve sleep, that alone, it's worthwhile. If you've got asthma, you can make a big difference for people with asthma, hay fever, the mind, and also, of course, your conditioning in terms of breathing for sport. So, yeah, a lot of information out there. I put it out there because I want it to be out there. So just even start with YouTube channel, Oxygen Advantage, and see where it takes you.
Well, thank you so much. That's a lot of great resources we can all check out. Patrick, like I said, I've learned a lot and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Great, Jaron. Great to be here.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.